Hi, everyone. Welcome to our G2I community event today. We are going to be talking about deploying AI agents from local to production. So, today is the fifth session of our 6 month exploration of AI powered development. Today, we're going to hear from Jai Bhagat from our developer community at G2I, where he shares his expertise on how to effectively deploy AI agents using NuxtHub and Cloudflare Workers. Specifically, we'll learn how to build and ship vertical AI solutions that deliver real value to clients while optimizing for both performance and costs. My name is Michelle Bakels. I will be hosting today's session. I am Senior Technical Program Director at G2I and co organizer of React Miami Conference. I wouldn't say everyone, but probably most people here are a part of our G2I community or are familiar with the company in some way. But if you are joining as a guest, a little bit about us. It is our mission to create custom talent pipelines so that our clients don't have to. We have a unique approach that combines customizable vetting, flexible terms, and tailored customer service to give us an advantage. So, whether you're hiring thousands of engineers to work on complex AI projects, or you need a highly skilled individual for your MVP, we can scale to your needs. And lastly, since we grew up in the open source ecosystem, we host our annual software developers conference, React Miami, every April. All of those details are live on reactmiami.com, and it's just coming up in a few weeks now. So we're super excited. About this session, these community events are interactive. So we have a lot of different ways that you can participate. First of all, throughout the entire presentation, feel free to leave your thoughts in the chat. Uh, Jai is not going to read your comments during his presentation, but we will look at them after the presentation is over, so that he can focus on, giving the presentation. We also have emoji reactions. So while it's a little bit hard to read the comments during the presentation, if Jai makes a joke or he makes a great point, you can leave some emoji reactions and he'll be able to see those and hopefully feel a little encouraged by them. And lastly, we have a second section where you can leave questions. So we're going to have a whole amount of time at the end of this session allotted to a Q&A. Any questions that you have that pop into your head throughout the entire presentation, feel free to leave them in that Q&A and we will answer them afterwards. Yeah, with that said, Jai is a front end specialist and AI educator with extensive experience in developer tooling and AI implementations. He's currently focused on AI consulting and education, has led significant projects at HashiCorp, Health Verity, and CityBlock Health. He has a unique combination of software engineering expertise and AI implementation experience, which makes him a great speaker to guide us through these practical challenges of deploying AI solutions. So, without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Jai. Thanks so much for being with us. Really looking forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Thay, and thank you everyone for being here. Gurjinder Sautrik, I see you, Anhe, I see you. I always do my best to, now it's I gotta take the jacket off immediately. It's already getting hot. But I'm gonna start sharing my screen. The most important thing and the most important part of today's talk. Hopefully, I'm showing the deploying AI agents on my screen. Hopefully, I'm not exposing all my emails. Cool. Give me a thumbs. Well, no, no one can give me a thumbs. But thank you, Michelle, for confirming that because that could be really bad. PII. So today we're going to talk about deploying AI agents. This is something that I've been doing for about a good minute. Around this time last year, I was working for a publicly traded company, working directly with the CEO, where we had a situation where we had a nine-figure sum of money, and we had to allocate that to buying a lot of generative AI companies at that point in time. I was focusing a lot of using my full stack skills and the experience I got from HashiCorp and doing acquisitions for AI. And that's when I really had the light bulb moment where I was like, oh, everything about AI is about the deployment. Because every time I was doing technical due diligence on buying a company, one of the biggest challenges I always had talking to every single founder was, all right, well, show me the technology. And people can talk a lot about tech, but when you see real deployments, either on your phone or through an actual deployed link, That's where things actually matter. So today's talk is all about going from local to prod. One of the big things that I ended up doing was I prefer convention over configuration. I like to use Nuxt, which is an alternative to Next.js. It's based in the um, Vue as a UI runtime by comparison to React, but I know the majority of you guys are using React, so I'm not selling you anything at all. I don't make money on this, so just keep that in mind. I'll like, and I also don't like vendor lock-in. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Cloudflare Workers, and we'll talk about how to build and ship vertical AI solutions that deliver real value to your clients. And also, us engineers, we have to stay relevant in this brand new age where AI is writing 90% of code. So that being said, we're just going to dive in. Any questions you have, feel free to just pop them in because I feed off of your energy. And teaching is the juice of my life. All right, so let's get it. So I'm your host. My name is Jai Bhagat. Recently, I spent the majority of my career labeling myself as a full stack software engineer. Now I label myself as a design engineer. I'll get more into why I chose to go that route. I'm also an AI educator. My favorite thing in the world is helping people of all backgrounds learn AI. Whether you're 70 years old, just learning how to use AI on your phone, which is one of the things I do teach, or even finding situations to help my sister who has a 2-year old and a 6-year old, my niece and nephew learn how she can use that to offload some of her work. I want to make AI radically accessible. Lovely. All right, so today, these are some of the things. So I'm going to go a little bit into teacher mode. So the four things that you can expect to get today is number one, I want to identify the best options for deploying AI workloads. Number two, I want you to understand why deploying AI is different than local development. Number three, personally, I like following the NuxtHub conventions for deploying AI, but at any point, we'll talk about how to do hot swaps. And like I said, I do not like vendor lock-in. So in the paradigm I'm going to show you, you'll be able to swap this out for like Vercel, Next.js, whatever makes sense for you and your company because you guys have to ship immediately. And then number four, I want to show you my tips and tricks for getting AI to behave. One of the big things we saw in January was the DeepSeek moment, which is roiling commercial and capital markets in America. And so we're moving from models which are now as intelligent as they can be. Now we move to reasoning models. So whereas before models had to be more and more intelligent, now we've reached that asymptote, meaning we've reached a limit. And now it's a matter of getting behavior. So how do we whip that model into shape is going to be some of the stuff that I show you guys and how I do that personally with no code tools, actually. First we're going to go over some key concepts. I'm going to try to be very brief on that. We'll go over some steps to follow, and then hopefully we can hold a lot of space for some tips and tricks. Um, so let's get into one of the key concepts. So when I introduced myself, notice I didn't introduce myself as front end, nor did I introduce myself as full stack software engineer, which up until just a year ago, I was doing that, right? And so why did I decide to make that switch? Well, my thought is that, and this is a hot take. You don't have to agree with it, but my idea is that the idea of software engineer and application developer, those are dead. Um, and now there's going to be three pathways. One is being a design engineer, which is that's your traditional front end person. But where the difference is, and what I'm seeing in the marketplace working across many different clients, is that now the design engineer is doing actual design, so understanding user behavior, user intention. It's not product design, which is doing Figma mocks. I think that is going to die very soon too. This is more so a matter of understanding user psychology, being able to rapidly prototype. It also requires some product management. It also requires a little bit of marketing capability as well. And so it's quite a lot in addition to that front end skill set. Number two is being the system engineer. And so what you're going to see right here is this is a little chip. This, this is what we call the bare metal, right? And so at the bare metal layer, the system engineer or traditionally the backend engineer, you're going to need to understand, well, where are your workloads being deployed? What are their limitations? And what happens in the case of an outage? One of the very unique things that I'm seeing happening over the course of the last 30 days is that Claude Anthropic had 8 outages in the last 30 days. On Monday, just yesterday, ChatGPT had an exceptionally large outage as well. And this causes not a big issue for engineers because, well, as an engineer, if you're trying to write code and you rely a lot on using those workflows, you're like, oh, darn it. But for your companies, where this matters is that all your companies, all your SaaS clients, you have to serve them. They sign an SLA. If something goes down, that's a problem in your contract. So your business stakeholders are going to be pretty mad. And so it's about now understanding some of these types of things. The other dirty secret about AI is just a wrapper for the cloud because no company has this expertise of the bare metal. I don't know. I personally, I've been in the industry for just a little bit of time, but I still haven't seen anyone have a server room. Everything's happening in US East 1. Well, not US East 1, but it could be happening, globally across many different data centers where you do not see the server where things are happening. The other big thing that happened in the last decade was we had the serverless paradigm. Didn't mean that there weren't any servers. It just meant that now you don't need to deploy your own server. But that causes an issue with timeouts, causes an issue on time. Anytime you work with the reasoning model, you know, Celtic and I worked on some reasoning functionality, and we worked with a very, very deep research type of API. It took 42 minutes for that to return. Most servers, most applications can't handle that type of lag time. It causes not only issues at the computer networking layer, but it also just may cause issues with your actual setup where you have a timeout that you don't even know about. And then number three, we have the integrations engineer. And that's the person who can deeply specialize in, okay, well, I understand AWS. I know AWS Bedrock. I know how to get that to talk to some of our other systems as well. And I can stitch these things together because SaaS eventually turned into PaaS, platform as a service, where you have one application, everything can happen in that app. Now applications are too bloated. So these are the three pathways that I see. Now, also in this same vein, I'm sure many of us recognize the man on the screen. This is Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. And recently, at least for the last 12 months, he's been talking about the thing that needs to happen with AI is the data centers need to be re-racked. So I talked about this bare metal layer. This is all of the bare metal, and it's a whole lot more. It's a lot bigger than this. We have an NVIDIA Jetson outside. I can't go grab it right now, but these things sit on these racks, and all of these data centers need to be re-racked because we're about to use a whole lot of compute. We also have brand new ways to store data. It's not just relational data, it's not just document databases, it's not just graphs anymore, but now we're dealing with vector spaces and vector databases. And then in addition to that, we have new challenges in how computers talk to each other because you have these intelligent AI agents who are now coming in inside of our own firewalls. And once something like that gets in, you're like, no, 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 no. Like the classic Dikembe Mutombo, for anyone who's old enough to remember him, uh, you gotta reject certain things that come in there. And so there needs to be a massive re-racking, which is why all of us now we need to have a greater understanding of what's happening at the bare metal layer. Because not only that, but the other thing is that it's wrappers all the way down. Anytime someone wraps something, there's a markup. That markup can get pretty expensive. So your future, I think, is really a matter of whether you decide to be a design engineer or whether you decide to go deeper to being a systems engineer. The design engineers are going to get deeper into the business layer. They're going to talk a lot more to the business stakeholders. They're going to be thinking with a lot more customer empathy. The systems engineers are going to get deeper with with understanding the bare metal. And so today we're going to talk about what happens if you take both pills, which is what I've been doing most recently in all of my client projects, because I need to meet the moment because I have bills to pay, right? And I'm sure you guys do too. So the tools and resources that I use, I like to use Nuxt. You guys can use anything that you guys like. I know that, the majority, like uh, LLMs are really good with coding languages where there's a lot of documentation and there's a lot of existing prior art. Next.js and the React ecosystem, they have the greatest volume. Um, However, I know that with a few shots, maybe about 3 to 5 shots, I can train a model to write perfect code for me in my situations. I also like to use Cloudflare, which also has an issue with Next.js now. If you've been following the beef on Twitter, we're not going to get into that, but what I do like about Cloudflare is there's these Cloudflare workers, and there's a lot of amazing features that you can get out of the box at an amazing price point. And then we also see DeepSeek here because if you guys are following pricing, this is one of the big things I see business stakeholders care about right now is business stakeholders are looking at pricing. And when you take a look at the pricing that is now open for OpenAI, I'm seeing, I think it was $70 for 1 million input tokens, something to that nature. DeepSeek is like 1/100th of that cost. So your business stakeholders are going to be saying thank you when you show them how it can help them because your business stakeholders, your PMs and the owners of the P&L, that could be the general manager, which is usually like a CTO, or it could be if you got a smaller company, it's actually the founder who needs to make a cost model, needs to make a revenue model to show how this is going to be profitable because investors no longer tolerate just spending money on everything, especially when you can't have expensive APIs and expensive engineers. You got to pick one or the other, and I prefer to be an expensive engineer. Um, so here's the steps that we're going to follow, and I'm going to start showing you what's happening, what's actually happening here. So the steps that I take when I'm moving through this process, and I'll tell you a short story. So the last AI application that I needed to deploy, it was for a founder, and I get a phone call. He's my buddy, but he hired me, and so he gives me a phone call and he goes, "Hey man, uh, I need to make some type of AI that does something." And that's all he said. Right? And I have to work with that. And I'm sure some of you have had that situation where you have to work with really loose requirements. And so, what I like to do, many of us, we've done user stories before to cut up our tickets. My preference is to use the jobs to be done framework, where essentially we still take that who, what, and why, but instead I think about what's the core job to be done. And I like to start thinking about the actual business stakeholder. So I have a founder who wants to deploy some AI feature so that he can raise some more money so that the company can stay afloat. So you have to reason about these types of things. You're going to have PMs coming to you saying like, "Hey, can we do this with AI?" And why might they be pushing for this? Well, they're worried about customers churning. They're worried about not being able to upsell their customers because when do you become profitable on a SaaS contract? Sometimes it's after year one. You're expecting the renewal, you're expecting the upgrades to happen in order to achieve the SaaS margins that the investors are looking for, which is for every dollar that comes in, the investors want to see that there's 70 cents of profit for every dollar that comes in. That's why they're in the SaaS business. Otherwise, they would have financed something else. So we want to keep this in mind. We also want to keep in mind of what does the user want to get done. In my situation, users wanted to review financial details for a deal and then decide whether or not to finance the deal. So that's the ultimate goal that they want. They want to get to a go, no go decision. And so when I use the language of my stakeholders, to say go, no go, to say income statement, to say P&L, things that may be foreign to us developers, when I just say and repeat those words back to them like a parrot, oh my goodness, the way that they open up and the trust that gets built just by parroting their language helps so much. So that's step one, is understand the job to be done. Step number two is the first thing I want to do before I touch the code is I go no code, and I want to spike and evaluate AI's capability to solve the problem. And I want to show my business stakeholders, I want to, this isn't the best term. I'll replace it with something else in the future, but you want to open the kimono here, which what that means is that you want to give them a peek behind the curtain as early as possible. The more touch points they can get in feeling like they create the product, it helps me because as developers, especially as a JavaScript engineer, you're going to run into situations where someone's like, "Oh, could you make that button a different color? Could you could you make this a little bit bigger? Could you move this over here?" And I'm like, "Okay, but you're taking my time away from more important stuff." So I like to, and so I see Joey's question here. How do you create a feedback loop to continuously improve an AI agent's performance in production? I'm going to show you this right now, actually. And so step two, three, and four, and five is actually part of this process. So you guys have already read this, and so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to move things over. So what you see inside of here is me doing step two. So this is the workbench by Anthropic. Anthropic is the company that creates Claude. And what this is I say that this is Claude on steroids because what I can do inside of here is I can make several workspaces. So if I'm working across multiple clients, it helps me keep things organized. I can, inside of here, I manage a prompt, but I manage a prompt and I'm working with this prompt like it's a function. Notice here, essentially, this is like I'm working with a template literal. For those of you familiar in JavaScript, because your prompt is just a string, and then if you put variables inside of the string, it's a template literal now. And so now I can include these variables in here, and I can start playing with what responses I get. I can also play with the different models that are available because one of the things that it helps me here with Joey, this is part of the feedback loop. So I want feedback loops and I want to be testing across many different models so I can go back to my business stakeholders and say, okay, this is the benefit of jumping to the latest model. And here's the difference in cost between, and there's going to be a big difference in cost between Haiku and Sonnet. There's also going to be a huge difference in latency as well. So I want to show my business stakeholder these are where the differences are. And directly inside of here in this evaluation tab, if you know about large language models, evaluations are one of the most important things we do for benchmarking these models. So directly inside of here, I can see given some inputs, what output did I get? I can grade this output on a scale of 1 to 5. In addition to that, I can then say, no, 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 given these inputs, this was my preferred output. And when this then happens, this then becomes an example for the model to use, and this is part of the post-training process. Now, usually for effective post-training, you need a couple hundred of inputs and output scenarios. The easy way to hack that is you can generate test cases inside of here. So this is synthetic data generation that you get for free directly inside of here. And what I'll do is I'll use the Pareto principle. So if I generate 100 of these synthetically, I'll take a look at 20% of them. That's the Pareto principle. And then I'll be like, I'll spot check 20%. I'll tweak those and then I'll see if I get my desired output. And now I can really start comparing things and I can see, okay, does the model do the job that I need it to? And if it does, I can click one button and I can get all the code and then just plug that in. And then I can wrap around that and give a UI to either my founder or my PM. And now I give them that feedback loop. So, Joey, to answer your question, this is part of the feedback loop. The first thing is dog fooding internally, and then using this evaluations tab to start seeing how well can AI handle this job. Now, I don't like vendor lock-in, so this is just the first part of the process where I'm spiking, and in under 1 hour, I want to have an answer. Can AI do the job? Um, so from there, the next thing I want to do is I want to identify any required context or data because Large language models are trained on data that's from the internet. Sometimes it's also stolen and pirated data. I'm not going to get into the how and the why for that, but that's just part of the process. Your data that's either in your database, available through a data broker or a data syndicate, or data that is coming just in time from the user is not trained by the model itself. This is when we want to use either retrieval augmented generation or cache augmented generation. That can be another talk that we do for picking processes around this. But I then want to see if given some context, how much stronger does it make my answer? And how much more relevant does it make things? So that's the next step that I see. And then the next thing I want to do is from the job to be done. So if I know that my user is looking for a go, no go decision, they want to crunch numbers. And once they crunch the numbers, they then still have a job to do, which is that analyst needs to give a report to his higher up, another PM, the portfolio manager. So now I'm like, wait a second. Okay, so the next API or workflow I need is I need to create an artifact so that they, instead of typing up a Word document themselves, they get the V0 for their Word document. And so I did this. And so the startup that I was consulting for, my founder got chewed out by his board. He had to fire a bunch of people, and then we implemented this strategy. He started pre-selling the application at a 10x premium for what most other people would charge. So charging, closer to $1,000 a seat per month. And people were still like, yeah, this is worth it because we're speaking their language. We're getting the job to be done to the best we can. And we're turning profit and we're doing sales rather than saying, okay, we'll start doing sales in Q3. Like a lot of PMs like to punt. But I like to do things, I like to just ship it, which is why I call my whole shtick just ship it. So once we have all this together, then I'll pull this down locally and I'll start testing, does this work locally? Does this work great with the UI? I'm gonna pause real quick. I see that there's a few questions queued up before I go into 6 and 7. So I see from Ethan, how do you handle integrations with external APIs and data sources in an AI deployment? Brilliant question. So in this situation, one of the first things I do, so when I'm testing locally, this is the stage that we're in right now. My mental model for this is that this is all about async await because integrations with external API and data sources means that either I'm working with another data source. That data source, we never want to mix the database server with other types of servers because we need to maintain integrity of our data. We also want our database to be ACID compliant as well. So I'm more so working with everything locally, being like, okay, well, how much asynchronous programming do I need to work around? And then what I'll usually do is I'm writing a lot of integration tests to see how is my system working. That's step one. Step two, when I then go to bring it into the cloud, I'm then testing against different sources. And once I bring it into the cloud, I'm measuring what my latency is going to be. And then I'm also getting a quick gut check on where's my complexity because the amount of asynchronous code that I have and the coordination of asynchronous actions that we're going to use by way of iterators and generators or NPM packages you may be using, like, Redux Sagas, which is a wrapper around iterators and generators. I'm thinking about the complexity of asynchronous code as my mental model for thinking about this stuff. And based on the amount of coordination of asynchronous actions that are inside of my state machine, that's my mental model. I'll write integration tests and I'll use that as a way to just think through my complexity. And that's how I'll go through the process. But then as I'm going through that process of the state machine, I then use that as a feedback loop because once I have the state machine written, this is how the asynchronous programming is coordinated. I send that back to my PM or founder, and I'm like, hey, FYI, this is the complexity we have. Is there anything I need to know with respect to how this data needs to be handled? Like, the things that I'll usually look at, Ethan, here is like PII, personally identifiable information, or I work heavily in the healthcare industry. So that's PHI, personal health information. So I'll be thinking about data privacy, and then I'll also just be thinking about, where data is allowed to be sitting. And so the PM will usually I'll punt it over to them to be like, hey, like, is this commercially viable? Like, can all these things talk to each other? And usually I'll have these things documented multiple steps along the way before I even deliver the code. So, Ethan, hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, just type back anywhere and then I'll work to answer it better. John, if we want to integrate AI into existing applications, what are some strategies for a smooth transition? So, for this one, this is a really good one too, I think. Um, this is challenging because everyone already has your application that's written. So what I would do is what I like to do typically is I'll come to Excalidraw. And when I'm in Excalidraw, I'll just show you guys this is how I do things. And Zoom is just has a terrible UI sometimes. Let's come over here. So usually what I'll be doing is I'll be let's see. Oh, it's not here. But usually I'll be making like I'll diagram things out, and one of the things I'll be looking at is I want to diagram where does my data sit? Because every UI is just making some GET request, and then iterating over data. Every application has two things. It has data and it has behavior. So I want to list where's all of my data coming from. Is it coming from a Postgres database? Is it coming from a document database? Is it coming actually from a Redis cache? And actually, this is a materialized view, which is hydrating the screen because this is a computationally expensive operation. So I want to take a look. What are all the pieces of data that hydrate my application? What are the queries that need to be made? And then I want to understand what's the latency there. What are some of the privacy requirements? Then I want to understand at the UI layer, what behavior do we perform on top of the data, which is just iterating over a data structure, and then applying some control flow over that data structure, or even transforming, adapting, and serializing said data. Once I have that, usually I'll just have a document that's written about all of that stuff that I can reference. And now I can pretty much operate from high level principles and I just know what to do. So smooth transition. So one of the big challenges, John, that you're going to run into when deploying AI into your existing application workloads is, well, where is this going to be deployed? That's one of the big questions you're going to need to answer is, okay, well, at the AI layer, well, where's my LLM server going to be? How close is it to my other pieces of data? How many prerequisite pieces of data need to come? Where does the LLM layer sit? And then where do we then come back to our own API layer? And what's the hang time? What's the expected latency going to be? Usually from there I can reason from first principles on where the data is going to come from, what's the latency, what's going to happen with outages, and also what's going to be the cost. I operate from that first rather than taking a look at feature sets of managed services. And then for integrating AI into your existing applications, the majority of your workloads are going to be deployed either through AWS, GCP, or Azure. So and the majority of you are probably going to be on AWS. So you'll just move over to Bedrock, which is going to be your simple answer there. If you have a more complex platform team, you'll be using the Google Vertex Studio. And if you're in Azure, you will use Azure Solutions, or you may need to introduce that you're going to become, kind of multi-cloud. So hopefully, John, that answers your question. And if not, let me know, and I'll do my best to answer it. So coming back to the presentation. So I'm usually doing a quick spike and I do the evaluations. I send that over to the business team. I then use that opportunity to then get into the nitty-gritty details about the context that's going to need to be provided and the data sources. And one of the big things about that context, quickly diving into RAG versus CAG, so retrieval augmented generation versus cache augmented generation, you know, Uh, we know caching is the second hardest problem in programming, next to, right directly after naming things. And so at the cache layer, we need to know at what point does my data, how often does this data get updated? If we have a situation where my data is not being updated, maybe it gets updated once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, or it's totally static, I know I can rely on CAG. Versus if I know that things are going to be regularly updated, I'll be leaning on RAG. Or if I have large swaths of data, like a big amounts of data, I'll be leaning in on RAG. So I keep quick mental models for how to think about how to break things up. Then I think about the workflow of the actual user, and I'm really thinking about what job they need to get done. And then once I have that done, I test things out locally by then being like, okay, this is all the asynchronous code I have. I'll design a state machine. Usually, even if I don't program a state machine inside of the application because sometimes I don't want to bring X state into an application. I'll diagram the state machine inside of XCalibur and I'll convert that into test-driven code where I'll do a black box diagram of the happy and the sad paths. I'll take the pictures of that and then I'll drop that into Claude and I get my initial code generation, which works exceptionally well. Now, step number six, this is where NuxtHub, Cloudflare, and DeepSeek now come into the fold because now this is where I swap out Claude for that. And so with NuxtHub, and also this is why I kept it to step six because I want you guys, like most of you guys are going to be using Vercel. All of this stuff is actually possible in Vercel. Vercel will give you the ability to bring in an open source model from Hugging Face. You can use Hugging Face to do inference training on those models and then just pull those into your workloads as well. What I like about this is that this is a wrapper around Cloudflare Workers without any markup. So that's why I like it, and it has a zero config deployment, whereas Vercel and Next.js, they give you a lot more flexibility with your configuration, but I hate configuration. I like convention over configuration. So, uh, and it's actually pretty straightforward inside of here. So this Hub AI is just a wrapper. It's an API wrapper on top of Cloudflare. I can then pick some models outside of here. I was really shocked when I learned that DeepSeek was available inside of here. So we'll now come over to Cloudflare Workers and I'll do AI and then I'll just type in DeepSeek and you'll see the pricing is super favorable. So you can get a 32 billion parameter model inside of here with a context token of about 80,000 tokens, which is pretty good. Considering like, Perplexity has a context window, I think of like 32,000 tokens. Many different tools have, I think like the floor right now is 32,000 tokens. So this is right in the middle inside of here. A dead simple API that looks very similar to your OpenAI API calls as well, because most people are just using that same model of the request response schema when using a REST API to query an LLM server. So you get a lot of functional parameters directly inside of here that give you decent fine grained control. You won't have the ability to post train the model, and which is a downside, but it's still exceptionally powerful in my opinion, and the pricing is very favorable. If I was to take a look at the pricing, I don't see it on this page. I wish I would have kept it open. But the pricing is very favorable. I think, yeah, if I come over here for DeepSeek, we see, yeah, 50 cents for every million input tokens. We compare that with OpenAI's pricing, which is $70 right now. It's 1% of the price. So at that layer is where I'm now thinking about the deployment strategy. And now at this point, one of the big things I can now do is I can show the business stakeholders I could do this using DeepSeek. I can do this with open source models. I can also show you what this looks like with OpenAI. I can show you what this looks like with Anthropic. And so now at the final stage, I then evaluate the model requirements. So this whole time, I've been working with evaluations inside of here. I can see the differences in different model sizes, and I can then map out what's going to be the difference in pricing here and with Cloudflare. I can then also go, OpenAI has a playground. And you can do similar things inside of the playground for OpenAI as well. And this is ChatGPT on steroids as well. I think this may take a little bit of time to load up, um, or maybe it won't load at all. I'm not sure. Um, but I'll move that piece past that piece because it's just a sandbox for working with those models. So then I'll be evaluating inside of there. So it's not part of the developer job, but when you can just show the business stakeholders this is how much it's going to cost, here's a compare and contrast to the other options, and here's what I like to do. They'll read that and then very similar to like someone who gives a dead simple code review, they'll just be like, looks good to me. They usually don't push back too much because most people don't know what's going on. So my tips and tricks. One of the things your business stakeholders care a lot about, two things. They care, number one, about jailbreaking. They care a lot about hallucinations. This is why I personally start with Anthropic because they have been the strongest at solving both of these problems. So for preventing jailbreaking, this is done by way of a system prompt. A system prompt is the thing that no matter what happens to your context window, this is what your LLM is going to remember no matter what. So this is where I want to have really strong controls here. And then I will want to have some set of evaluations that are associated with jailbreaking. And I want to do this preemptively because a lot of us at G2I, when we're being contracted out, this is going to be for that initial MVP development. They don't care for you to solve the jailbreaking problem. They just want to be like, did you think about it so that I can tell other people that I thought about it? And then when you say, don't worry, I'm your CYA policy. CYA just means cover your own ass. And so by showing them those evaluations, they get that initial gut check. And usually things aren't high stakes with an MVP. So you have to, yeah, you still have to meet the moment. And as a single person, maybe there might be a 100x engineer in the cloud, in the crowd right now, but I'm not a 100x engineer. Uh, for hallucinations, the simplest way to solve hallucinations are citations. You get this out of the box with Anthropic. With other models, you'll have to come up with your own citations engine that will help here. So this is where I may be connecting some small models with some large models. So one of the things that I'll usually do is in a RAG system, retrieval augmented generation, whenever you break down the user's query into smaller chunks, and then whatever you query from your own database to get your document chunks, those document chunks serve as your citations, and then I serve that back in the API response. That's how I solve the hallucinations problem. If I want to do that at the LLM layer, I may think like I'm not solving this problem and I don't want to bring another API in. So this is where I would try to make a business case for using Anthropic's models, which have citations out of the box. The next thing I'll also do is throughout this process, I make my own components. And so I'll start making components for, okay, this is the process of stitching together small models and large models together. Or this is my process for being able to have a server that has one service, which has the ability to query our data source, to then query an LLM, to then format the response and send it back to the user. I'll turn that into my own personal component that I'll have in a separate repo for myself so that anytime that I need to go produce another MVP, which is the main thing I'm being hired to do right now, I get hired to do feasibility studies. So that's the thing I do so that I can go even faster. So in the beginning, it's going to take you a lot of time, but I just use that higher order components mindset. The next thing is that I I'm testing very early in the process, right? So when I have the job to be done, I use that as my first testing ground of like, does this actually solve the user's problem? Am I getting strong gut check from them that this is what I need? Okay, great. That's one feedback loop. The next feedback loop is when I'm testing inside of Claude, I may just pair program and pair prompt with my business stakeholders and show them it as early in the process as possible. Because when you get some requirement or you get that phone call, hey, could I get some AI that does something? And then within under 4 hours, you guys are pairing together and the business stakeholder has perceived progress. It it cuts development time by weeks, if not months. And so bring them as early in as possible so that they can start seeing it. And then when you start seeing how they want to use it, I'll then grab different pieces of code. So here's one where this is one of the things I like to do is when I get some code that's spit out, usually one of my biggest tricks is I teach the AI, hey, just write things using conventional commits. This is a convention pattern for how to put up a pull request. I get significantly better code that's very easy for me to debug because I have a commit history. And then later on, if I need to do a git bisect, I get the benefit of these commits being here. And so what I'll then do once I have really good prompts that I like, I'll tag these internally as release candidates. And I'll grab the code for this, I'll wrap it in a UI, and then I give that to my business stakeholders, or I'll give that to my internal team so that we're dog fooding these prompts. The more you dog food and the more iterations you get on testing this stuff, where you start seeing what impresses people, what expectations do they have, what do they think is cool, what actually moves the needle for them, because I think this is groundbreaking technology. When I show this to people, they care the most about the end result because they want to outsource the end result. We have distributed systems. They want distributed cognition. They want to offload parts of their brain to AI so that they can free up parts of their brain again to focus on their zone of genius. Me being able to give them that requires me to dog food quite heavily. So I'll do that. Then for creating the feedback loops, I think John had asked that question. So my feedback loops really involve like this is the agile methodology. You know, it's all about customer collaboration. It's not about gathering requirements. Throughout my whole process, I keep large swaths of my day open so that I can pair a prompt and I can pair a program with the business stakeholders. Ideally, I want to have like, even if I'm working remote or whether I'm working in person, I want to have 2 to 3 sessions every week where I work shoulder to shoulder with them. And so by giving them that feeling like, hey, I'm not going rogue, we get a lot of feedback loops because I want to get I want to see where their eyes go. I want to see when they get overwhelmed by the outputs. I want to see what language they're using so I can get key pieces of missing context. So I like to have large windows of pair programming multiple times a week, which is a strong feedback loop. And then I also, through the internal dog fooding and creating my own small UIs, nail clipper applications, things that do one tiny, tiny job. That's one of the things I'll do. Once that's done, then I'm optimizing my workflows. And I optimize my workflows by just cutting things dramatically or making my prompts stronger. And then the last thing I do is I test across multiple LLM providers. So whether I'm using open source models that are available through Cloudflare Workers, maybe I do need to go to Hugging Face and see what models are going to be available because it looks like China is just leaps and bounds ahead of everything that we have. DeepSeek just released a brand new model which outperforms all the state-of-the-art models that we have here in America last night. So I'm constantly staying abreast with what's happening on Hugging Face, seeing what's production ready in Cloudflare, doing compare and contrast between OpenAI as well as Claude, and then from time to time, if I want to be funny, I'll see what Europe has going on with Mistral. And so I test with multiple LLM providers. And the main artifact that I do to justify my time in these areas is I give the business stakeholder, these are my evaluations. Here's what it matters for cost. Here's what it matters for the customer. And when they have that, it's like you're doing the job of the PM a little bit. And so then the PM loves you too, because now you take something off of their plate so they can focus on creating more top line revenue or figuring out how to make the business more profitable. So those are some of my tips and tricks there. I realize I've gone way far over. I'm really sorry. I think this was supposed to be just like a half hour. But that's all from me. We'll open everything up for questions. In the event that you do have a question that can't be answered, I will try my best to email you, or you can email me. That's all.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that super comprehensive presentation, Jai. Yeah, you were answering, usually we do like the Q&A at the end, but you were answering a lot of them as you went along, which I think was, yeah, great. I mean, I think you were able to provide a lot of context within the context of your presentation. So thank you for that. That does sort of bring us to time. We kind of like shuffled in the last segment into the presentation. So we are really wrapping up on time. Um, there is one more question in the Q&A if you want to stick. Is it okay if we
Yeah,
stick around for
yeah.
just a sec?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have time.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's Anhe or Angie, or maybe it's something entirely different, but I usually love to pronounce names correctly. So it says, thanks, Jake, for a good presentation. In the beginning, you mentioned teaching AI to 70-year-olds. What can you teach them about AI? So Ange, sure, okay. Sorry, Ange. So Ange, this is what I'll say is mobile AI. This is where I think everything is moving to. So what I teach everyone is the first thing I teach everyone how to do is how do you use Perplexity on your phone. And one of the things, whether you're 70 or whether you're my sister, the thing that makes this really powerful is being able to use AI on your phone. One of the things that I started doing when GPT-4 Turbo was released, multimodal models where you can take a picture of something and say, "What is this?" Or recently, like I came to Texas, I have a little rinky-dink apartment. I love having a good Argentinian Malbec, and I had a terrible corkscrew opener. So I took a picture and I was like, how do I open this? Because it's not the traditional corkscrew that I'm used to that has the leverage. So I didn't know how to get leverage. I took a picture of it on my phone and I was like, how am I going to open this? And the AI was able to label everything I had on my little desk. And it was like, so what you're going to do is and then it told me, hey, you know, I had so essentially it was a little corkscrew that had a hole like this, and it was like, what you need to do is you need to move something in here so you can have some leverage. It taught me a little trick of like, oh, you just got to shake it a little bit, start pulling it out, and then start twisting it as you open it up. And then I opened a bottle of wine. Or so for my 70-year-old teacher, one of the things, I start to realize where are the blockers in people's lives. So they might be trying to do something. They might be like, someone might be struggling with like, oh my goodness, like I have a desk full of papers. I don't even know where to start. That's usually where I'll use mobile AI. And I also teach them a lot about using voice AI because they need a companion. So, Ange, to answer your question, I think mobile AI, mobile intelligence, that's the big thing that I teach everyone. And that's the and so and I teach a lot of people over the age of 50 how to use AI, and they go crazy when I show them this stuff.
Love it. Yeah, those are all great examples. They just posted in the chat if you want to connect with Jai after this presentation, you can connect with him on the G2I Slack or on LinkedIn. She posted the LinkedIn link, so go ahead and grab that before we close our community event for the day. I always like to offer at the very end, Jai, the opportunity for any of our speaker guests to leave us some sort of departing wisdom. Um, maybe it's something that didn't come up in the chat. Maybe it's a philosophy that you have. Maybe it's a dad joke or whatever it is. Like it's your moment to share any last final thought for our event today.
Yeah, what I'll say is the answer is always in the work you're avoiding. Right
Mm,
now, developers, we're at the most unique turning point. A couple years ago, we were some of the most in demand people. Anyone could leave a job and you could immediately just be hired again. Now things are changing. There's a brand new form of intelligence that threatens the livelihood that many of us have, whether you have mortgage, whether you have kids, whether you have other people to support. I know that this can be really scary for a lot of people. And one of the scarier things is going to be, well, how do I differentiate? A lot of engineers, you're afraid to put yourselves out there, to get in front of a camera, or to learn new skills. But just keep this in mind. The answer is always in the work you're avoiding. You don't need to get deep into the bare metal. You don't need to, fully learn like how to use CUDA right now. Find the low-hanging fruit that's directly in front of you, whether it's learning a little bit more about the business, learning a little bit more how to network, doing more technical talks. The answer is always in the work you're avoiding. So take a look at what low-hanging fruits in front of you that you know is so obvious, but you've been writing it off, and start leaning in towards that. Lean in towards that discomfort, and I can guarantee you that there's going to be a lot of rewards that come from that.
Solid life advice in general can be applied to many, many things. Well, thank you so, so much. I'm not alone. You can tell from the chat here that everybody thoroughly enjoyed this presentation and learned a lot. And again, we can't thank you enough. We really appreciate your time and your expertise that you shared with us today. So thanks so much, everyone. Go connect with Jai, and we'll see you for the next one, which is our last one. So we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.